its credibility. Where is the FBI investigation into that? There isn't one. But on the same hand, we see over 100 raids and arrests of our supporters in the United States, in England, in Spain, in Australia, who have done nothing but try to do an electronic equivalent to what is going on here today. An electronic sit-in of PayPal, Bank of America, Visa, MasterCard, and so on. Those individuals are now facing dozens of years of jail as a result of demonstrating their electronic political dissent. And in a modern world, that cannot be tolerated. We cannot tolerate a world where our interactions have become electronic, and yet there is no effective right to gather. There is no effective right to demand redress in the way that these people here today are doing so in the physical world.
So is that a PR campaign you imagine?
By November 14, the European Commission is due to make its first ruling as a result of our complaint against Visa and MasterCard. And that will either open up a full investigation and prosecution of the antitrust activities of Visa and MasterCard in relation to WikiLeaks, or the investigation will be dropped. If the investigation is accepted, then that tells us something extremely important about the bank, and it's the first sign of a strong disciplining force in relation to unlawful activities of major banking powers. If, on the other hand, that investigation is dropped by the European Commission, that tells us something important about Europe and its relationship to American banks. That is, it is servile to American banking interests. That Europe, as a nation, as a multi-state entity, has no effective power to support the interests of its own population against multinational corporations acting out of Washington foreign policy.
Julian, what do you hope this protest will achieve today?
I hope that this protest, more than anything else, will result in a similar sort of process to what we saw in New York, to what we saw in Cairo, to what we saw in Tunisia. It is not an instantaneous process. Rather, it is the professionalization of activism, the professionalization of demanding response and redress from an elite in society that is no longer reflecting the majority will. And if we look at what happened in Cairo and what happened in New York over the last few months, we have seen that through dedication, courage and professionalism, what seems to be an initially discordant group can come together and make sound political structures and political decisions. And I think we may see that today. It looks hopeful what is going on here. There's a lot of people, there's a good turnout, people are behaving respectfully to each other, they're thinking about the big issues and not the small issues. And so that gives me great hope for how this demonstration and process will develop over the next month.
How do you the police today? I think you have
The police here are kettling people. This was denounced only a few months ago, and recommendations were put in place in the MET that kettling be eliminated or reduced. And yet we see it here used against a peaceful political protest. And I have spoken to the police here. They have said to me, this is a peaceful crowd, it's good weather, no troublemakers, and so on. So why is it that kettling is being used? This is not something that is routinely used in Australia or the United States or in Canada. It is a tactic that should only be used in the severest situation. It is fundamentally anti-democratic. We have speakers here and a well-behaved crowd trying to listen to them, engaging in an assembly, a basic democratic process, and yet others have been kettled away from it. The crowd is not so large that there is any risk of stampede. The crowd is well behaved, it's daylight, no one is drunk, etc. It is a perfect political crowd on the step. There should be no kettling here.
Why do you think so?
There are thousands and thousands of people here who have been broken up into different groups by the kettling. This is actually a really quite impressive turnout. We
What
must
do you
go
think we
back
should
to
do about it?
what happened in New York only 3.5 weeks ago with the beginnings of Occupy Wall Street. There are only around 70 people on the first day, so this is an extremely impressive turnout. We perhaps can compare this great crowd with the turnout we saw for the 10th year of the Afghan war. The numbers here are substantially larger. This is an issue that clearly affects significant numbers of the British population, and they are willing, rightly, to turn up and make their sentiments known. Because of the situation, I cannot take part meaningfully in this process or any others because I am detained most of the time under house arrest in Norfolk. One can adapt to almost any situation.
What do you say to those who say the solution is to withdraw the money from the banks? The first step of action.
Well, the important step of action is seeing which banks are good banks. There are some good credit unions, for example, operating in the United Kingdom and rest of Europe. People, yes, should withdraw their money from banks that have practices that they do not approve of, or invest in companies that they do not approve of, and put them into these other institutions. They have the same levels of protection in terms of financial insurance and roughly the same interest rates. So that is a good step for people to do, to not be tools of these banks, but rather play the market. My advice to this group, from my experiences in the Middle East over the past 3 years, is that we should look to the lessons of others that have been successful. Why was Cairo so successful in the face of such opposition? It was because people kept the high ground, they kept track of what the real issue is. The real issue is not the police. The police, like any organisation, is made up of good guys and bad guys. The police just do as they're told. The real issue is those people commanding them to do particular things, to protect banking interests when democratic forces are pushing in the other direction. So look to those successes and, as much as possible, professionalise, act intelligently, look to the long game. Well, that is something that must come out of each country and the problems that it has seen. And I believe that this process will allow lots of voices to be heard. Voices of people who have actually studied this issue. For example, Tax Justice Network has been studying these problems for many years. There is a solid body of academic research behind a lot of these problems. But this process and the media interest in this process allows these well-studied problems to come to the fore. One proposal that has a lot of academic weight behind it is a Tobin tax, for instance. That is something that may well be worth doing. Another is in relation to how much influence banks and other big corporations can have on our politicians. What the constraints should be on lobbying by very powerful groups or individuals. lobbying beneath the surface.